Hello and welcome everybody to this video. In this video we're going to be talking about Overclocks and Deep Rock Galactic and how I think some of them could use a little bit of a change. I did a video like this once upon a time, I don't remember how long ago, talking about 10 potentially underpowered overclocks. And since making that video, a lot of the overclocks that were on that list have actually been changed for the better. We now see supercooling chamber actually having somewhat of a relevant spot now, which is great. Before it was just a overclock that you took if you didn't want to have ammo or really anything. It did really high damage, so it was okay on like elimination missions. But outside of that, it was pretty mediocre to just bad. Since then, it has been buffed, which is really nice. And a couple of the other overclocks that I kind of had issues with also got buffed throughout that, and just generally in the community had some issues with, and even some of the overclocks that I had no issues with got buffed too, which is pretty nice. So here is 5 of the overclocks that I would still like to see some sort of change with, one way or another, either making them more interesting, because I'd rather have extremely fun overclocks than necessarily extremely overpowered overclocks, or even just really strong overclocks. So let's begin. At our 5th spot, I kind of have a mix of overclocks here, and these ones I wrote down as redundant overclocks, but they're not really redundant. It's just that there's multiple of the same one in the same category. So think of this as like 3 overclocks doing basically the same job or a similar job. And I don't really know if we need 3 for certain weapons. It kind of makes sense to have 2 depending on what level of rarity they are, whether they're clean, balanced, or unstable. But with certain weapons, we have like 1 of each. The minigun's a pretty good example of this, where we have 3 damage overclocks. Now the minigun I think is spread out a little bit better than some of the other weapons that I would like to talk about. But just for the sake of it, let's talk about this one, where we have a clean overclock that actually was really good, where we have slightly increased damage but also faster spin up, so we can stack this with spin up and it feels really good overall. We've got exhaust vectoring as a balanced, which gives us slightly more damage than our clean one by 1 more point, but it makes our gun less accurate. That's not a huge deal if you take accuracy in tier 1. And then we also have lead storm, which gives you a lot more damage, but you can't move, sort of. That one does change it up quite a bit, and that's why I think the minigun is a better example of this, but I'm really not sure if we really need a little more oomph, exhaust vectoring, and lead storm all on the minigun by themselves. I wouldn't be opposed to switching out one of them for something, because we have some really cool ones with the minigun where we have like burning hell and bullet hell, which change the minigun up quite a bit, and lead storm does too. Even a little more oomph fits really well for a clean overclock. It's just something like exhaust vectoring is good on the minigun, but it doesn't change it dramatically. A better example of this I think was on the burst pistol, where we also have 3 damage overclocks on it. And they're kind of odd ones, where we have a clean one that barely gives us anything. It's like 1 more point of damage and 0.2 second faster reload. It's pretty minimal. It doesn't matter that much. We have a balanced one with experimental rounds that gives you 9 more damage, I believe, but cuts down on your total ammo, which does change the gun quite a bit. And then we also have lead spray, which gives you something like 11 damage on it or something like that. I don't remember the exact values, but increases your spread by 400%. So your gun suddenly becomes way more close range, but much higher damage in that close range. So with that one, again, it's like 3 damage overclocks, and I'd rather pick either of the extreme overclocks over the clean one. Now that can just be an issue with the guns in general, where there is an overclock or 2 that just outperforms the other ones. But when there's so many other options you could do to change the guns into something else rather than just adjusting stats a little bit, I kind of feel like it's a missed opportunity there. So with those type of overclocks, I would just kind of like to see them get some sort of change. I'm not exactly sure what, but I think just like a complete rework to something else, to where it gives you either another kind of wacky effect, or it gives you an effect that's not seen on the other overclocks. Because at least then it would stand out more rather than always be competing with like 2 other ones. And if you have 3 overclocks all competing for basically the same type of job, you're naturally going to have 1 or 2 that just outperform the other 1 or 2 that aren't going to be up there. So the second overclock that I kind of have an issue with, and have had an issue with since it came out, is manual guidance cutoff for the Hurricane. This one's more specific because this one I think just is kind of an issue overall. It's a clean overclock that actually kind of handicaps your weapon. Sort of, not really, but its effect just isn't that great. You get something like 20% more velocity to your missiles, I think, unless it's like 30% more. That's nice, but then once you let go of the trigger, your missiles will then just start flying forward. They no longer have the tracking on them, and the tracking is the funnest thing about the Hurricane. at least, you know, just base kit. It's really cool that you have a long-range weapon that you can steer, and you can fly this into enemies basically anywhere on the map, assuming there isn't just walls in front of you or they run behind cover or whatever. But that usually doesn't happen. Most of the time the bugs are just coming right to you. With this, it kind of does a job that you don't really need it to do, because you can cancel the hurricane shots just by pickaxe canceling or switching weapons and then let your missiles fly off. I think if it did more of an extreme effect, where it could still keep all of these stats, but maybe made it so the further your missile travels, the more damage it does, or once the manual guidance cuts off, the missile starts speeding up dramatically. I think just something simple like that would really make it stand out and make it a lot more fun. Even if it is just something like the missiles fly much faster to the target, they would still have some sort of use, some sort of niche, because you could take them on like industrial sabotage missions and just fire them at sniper turrets because they're not moving. You could also fire these at just any sort of stationary targets, so like spitballers you could be really safe at killing from a distance, or nexuses, or even really big slow moving targets you could probably hit. I mean, detonators are pretty big targets and don't move that quick. I think that would be the easiest way to implement this one. Of course, you could rework it entirely to do something else. I don't think that's necessary because we do have 2 other overclocks that change your guidance system as well. Mine Layer system cuts it off entirely, and Mine Layer system is actually quite good. At least if you don't have MacTerra Plague. On MacTerra Plague it does kind of suck, but on every other mission it can be really strong so long as you can set it up ahead of time. And Salvo Module, which still has the guidance system, and you can still tap fire the rockets, but then has the added advantage that you can turn it into a rocket shotgun. So either of those overclocks I would much rather take over manual guidance cutoff. The third overclock that I have issues with is double barrel. Double barrel for the boomstick is just so underwhelming and so underpowered compared to the other overclocks. It actually comes at just a detriment to the gun, where now you're forced to fire out both barrels every time you want to shoot the shotgun, which just isn't necessary a lot of the times. It's fine against big enemies, but again, it gets outcompeted by every other overclock that the double barrel has. Any of your other clean options are better than this one, where your ammo one gets you more value than this one, and same with your stuffed shells, gets you more damage than double barrel does. So you could just take the faster fire rate in tier 2 and just have a stronger overall weapon. There's not really a reason to take this, and I think that this one should really just get reworked into something else. Some people have suggested that you could just change it to where it's optional whether you want to fire out 1 barrel or 2 barrels just by simply holding down the trigger more. So, you know, if you hold down the trigger, it'll fire one and then the other immediately, which you can already kind of do since you have the tier 2 option. You just have to tap it twice really quick. It would just be a slight damage buff then that I'd probably never use for basically anything. It would still kind of get outcompeted by the other overclocks. I think that this one should just get changed completely, make it like an unstable overclock, give it some like crazy stuff, make the downside still be that you have to fire out both barrels, but maybe give it knockback on both you and the enemy that you're hitting. Maybe the knockback is not as extreme as like Special Powder is, but still knocks you back regardless. And maybe give it like slugs or something to where it just concentrates all the damage into, you know, 2 slugs that fire out. Maybe give it armor breaking on top of that if you want to have it be something really unique. There's a lot of different ways you could change double barrel, and I think it should probably just get reworked entirely. The double barrel has a weird spread of overclocks anyway, where it's got 4 clean, 1 unstable, and 1 balanced. I would just say take double barrel and either throw it in the unstable or throw it in the balanced instead of the cleans. For the 4th overclock, or overclocks that I kind of have an issue with, is Homebrew Powder. Homebrew Powder just feels kind of underwhelming to me. It's never felt that great, and I've always seen the other choices as kind of being better than Homebrew Powder. Homebrew Powder does go for 3 weapons, technically 4 weapons that I can think of, because it's also on the grenade launcher, but on the grenade launcher it's a mod, and if it's a mod, I find it far more easy to use and just better overall. The other ones are the Sabata, which basically feels about the same regardless of how you want to build it. Even if you build it with Homebrew Powder, even if you build it for all damage, it still kind of feels the same. The GK2, which did get better since this update, it feels a lot more consistent now, especially since your damage mods are condensed into 1 mod. That was a huge improvement because it was kind of annoying to pick 2 damage mods just so you don't low roll against swarmers with it. Now you just have to take the 1, which you were probably going to take anyway because you can now high roll and do some pretty decent damage. And then the revolver, which the revolver I think is probably the best one out of these because the revolver doesn't really care if it low rolls damage. You're still probably going to kill whatever the heck you were trying to shoot with it anyway, or you were just going to follow it up with another shot. This just makes it a little bit more consistent for killing big enemies. So the revolver I have the least amount of problems with, but I still find it underwhelming, and I still won't take it if I want damage, because I find elephant rounds and volatile bullets just a little bit more consistent and better. Volatile bullets hits incredibly hard, and it's just ridiculous if you're bringing fire. And elephant rounds gives you a little pocket sniper rifle, which you do have reduced ammo, but that's okay. If I'm just taking it for that job, I'm probably taking a second, or I'm probably taking my primary that's all set up for just crowd control. So that's its only role to really be used in. For an idea to change this one, to make it more randomized if you want, not necessarily just in damage, don't just tweak the numbers. You could do that and maybe have some crazy rolls and stuff. It would at least be a little bit more unique then. Another way you could do it is just simply randomize a lot of things about it. You could even randomize its damage type if you wanted. So you can make it so every bullet just can randomize what type of damage it does, whether it does ice or fire or corrosion or electricity on top of it. Maybe make these effects less common, so only maybe 1 in 10 bullets or 1 in 5 bullets can trigger one of these effects to potentially build up something. So every once in a while you might trigger a thermal shock, or every once in a while you might get a little bit of corrosive damage on there. Maybe you could even add armor breaking, or maybe even make something like a magic bullets effect where it can potentially bounce into other enemies. You'd probably have to adjust this based on each weapon, because something like the GK2, it'd probably have to be more bullets just because you're firing out more bullets. Sabata kind of the same way, but revolver you can make it like a 1 in 4 or whatever, and just see what type of effects you get. I think that would change it up significantly, and not necessarily make it really strong, but it would make it really fun to try out, because you never know what the heck you're going to be getting with any of these bullets. And then the last overclock that I kind of have an issue with is chain hit, and this is also on 2 weapons. This is on the Sabata and on the revolver. And both of these feel like just filler overclocks for either of the weapons. It's fine on either of them, but it's not really one that you're going to take over some of the other ones. I'm not going to take chain hit on the revolver when I could just take something like 6-shooter or magic bullets. If I didn't have any sort of overclocks on the revolver, then yeah, throwing chain hit would be fine on there. It's kind of the same thing with the Sabata. I'm not going to be taking this over automatic fire or embedded detonators, unless I just want to use the basic Sabata. And the thing is, chain hit could actually be really good if it was put on other weapons besides the revolver and besides the Sabata. If you put chain hit on something like the minigun, or let's say the GK2 or the Zukov, something with a really high rate of fire that doesn't necessarily do high damage per shot, I think it would probably actually be a really strong overclock, especially on something like the minigun where you're just spraying out so many bullets. The problem is that on the revolver, it's just somewhat a little bit of value, but you're probably not going to notice it a whole lot. And on the Sabata, it will be consistent value there, but it's still not going to be a massive amount of consistent value. I'd still rather take some of the other overclocks over it. So suggestions for this one is that you could potentially change it for just other weapons. If you give it to the minigun, it'd be really strong. If you give it to the GK2, it'd probably be really strong there too. Another way you could potentially change it is just upping the values of the chain hit. So just make it so it can bounce to multiple enemies throughout a chain. So not just potentially one, but of course every time it bounces, it has less of a chance of bouncing to other enemies, or potentially even giving it a minor magic bullets effect where there's a small % chance that even if you miss a shot, it'll still try to bounce to another nearby enemy. That would be something a little bit more unique for chain hit, and I think it would be a little bit better overall. So these are 5 overclocks that I would change. Tell me what your thoughts are on these overclocks and what 5 overclocks you would pick that you would like to see some changes in, whether that be just damage values changed, or the values of the weapon just in general changed, or any sort of just fun mechanics added to these overclocks. Thanks for watching this. I really do appreciate it. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.